Good morning, friends. It's Saturday, and I'm back with Chapter 11 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call The Vault. Summer vacations seemed to be lasting forever this year as I explored and learned new things about the farm. Dad did get a new shop where he did paint and body work on cars, but he continued to do the mechanical work in our garage. This meant that he was there at the farm for at least a little while every day. After letting the fertilizer tea steep for several days, I grabbed a large stick to stir it up. When I opened the top, the smell was horrible, and I thought I was going to be sick. But that passed after a few moments, and I plunged the stick in to stir it up. The water was very dark, and when I bailed some out to put it in the watering can, it looked brown, just like tea. I poured a little at the base of each of my plants, and then added more water and plant clippings to the barrel to bring the level up. I wasn't sure if I should still water the garden after adding the fertilizer tea, so I waited until that evening to water it to make sure the plants had plenty of time to take up the nutrients from the tea. Then each day after, I watered in the morning after I had fed the chickens and ducks. My garden was growing lush, and there was always something good to eat there, from radishes and carrots to fat cucumbers and tomatoes, and round, delicious honeydew, cantaloupe, and watermelons. I had corn stalks taller than myself, and a lattice wall covered in green bean and pea vines made from a couple old sections of snow fence that I found in a field. I learned all of these gardening skills from my grandfather, whose own garden grew just down the hill a couple hundred yards from mine. He could grow zucchini as big as a man, and watermelons a kid could hollow out and climb into and hide. He also taught me a lot about how to raise my chickens, turkeys, and ducks. I had some of the healthiest small stock a kid could hope for. But what no one ever really taught me was how to cook. I could grow the food and was even adept at butchering, but to actually prepare it into something good to eat, that's what moms and grandmas are for, right? Well, not always, as my mom liked to drink just as much as my dad, and there were times it was necessary to scrounge around and find myself and brother a meal. I noticed this trend beginning at 10 years old, and it steadily progressed. At first, I learned that you could read the label on a box of baking mix to learn how to make pancakes. After a few failed attempts, I managed to produce pancakes which weren't burned or have arms and legs because I flipped them too soon. Bacon and hash were easy to prepare, and these came almost without thought, but there came a time when I wanted to roast a chicken but had no idea how. Mom and Dad had gone out partying with some friends on Saturday night and didn't get home until long after the sun came up. They went straight to bed on arrival, leaving Mark and I to fend for ourselves. Since it was Sunday, we thought we would be having a chicken dinner. We had a good chicken, all cleaned and plucked and ready for an adult to make roast chicken out of, but there were no sober adults around. We didn't own any cookbooks that I was aware of, so I was on my own. Remembering what I saw when I watched my mother make the chicken, I put the chicken in the roasting pan, sprinkled it with salt and pepper and other seasonings I'd seen used, and put it in the oven, turned up to 325 degrees. Then I set to read in the baking powder can about how to make biscuits. I had no idea how long it should take to bake a chicken, but I did know that if it was pink inside, I wasn't eating it. So I left it to cook, and then the biscuits were done. While they reminded me a little white hockey pucks, they didn't taste half bad slathered in a pound of butter while I waited for the chicken to finish. Finally, I thought the chicken should be done and not pink on the inside anymore, and I took it out to check. Imagine my surprise when I looked at the chicken legs with their bones sticking way out of the meat in a crude gesture when I took the lid off. I poked the chicken with a fork and the meat just fell off the bones. So I knew it was done and called my little brother in to have dinner, as we were having salad, hockey pucks, and chicken jerky. The next morning, I decided that since Mom wouldn't buy me Fruit Loops, I was going to make my own. So, taking the juice from a jar of maraschino cherries, I poured it over 1/3 of my Cheerios. Over another third, I put grape juice. And over the final third, I put lemon juice. About this time, I heard the toaster pop and went to get the toast and butter it before it got cold. When I returned, I was dismayed to find that I could stand my spoon in my Cheerios, and it looked like someone had put cottage cheese in there. I took a tentative taste of my creation. Sitting on the back porch eating my toast, I decided right then and there that I was going to have to find myself a wife when I got older, because something about cooking and me didn't seem to be working. Feeling somewhat dejected, I wandered off the porch to do my chores. I made sure the chicken waterers were full, topped off the grain, sprinkling some on the ground so my chicks would get practice scratching. Then I filled the small wash tub in the corner so the ducks could splash around, and finally connected the hose to the sprinkler for my garden. When the watering was done, I wandered over to Fort Stix and went inside. I had to move my bucket way over by the door because all of the stuff on the floor. As time went on, my brother and I had collected quite an abundance of treasures. The floor of Fort Stix was crowded as the smaller corner could not hold it all. We had to do something, because we needed more space. I was sure that we would find new members for our club sooner or later, and wanted to make sure we had room for our secret meetings. Not only that, but new members would surely be highly discriminating, and we would not want to be thought of as sloppy in our security measures. Obviously, the fact that anyone could see in and see our treasure meant that we were pretty lax on security. So I devised an ingenious plan. Everyone knows that young boys love two things above all else: digging and pretending. These are among the primary occupations of the grade school boy, and I can say this was a good prelude to the rest of my life. Whether I was hunkered down in a foxhole during Army training, pretending I was off at some bar with a lovely gal, or digging a makeshift latrine in the woods of Colorado as I dreamed of majestic elk I would be seeking with the coming dawn, I often found myself digging and pretending. Thus, leaning toward these tendencies, I decided we would dig out the floor of Fort Stix and make a vault. Then, by covering it over with planks and having a trapdoor with a ladder, we would be the envy of every other kid in the county who also had a fort. It was a good plan. It would take a bit of time to install the vault, so I needed to be able to finish it in one day. I knew that any project which was not finished in a single day was likely to take several weeks, if it ever got finished at all, because there was always something more important to do. I spent the first couple hours of the morning trying to decide if I should build the ladder or dig the vault first. The time was not all wasted, as I did manage to gather the materials for the ladder, but when I started to assemble it, I realized I was not sure how deep the vault would be. If the ladder were too long, it would stick up out of the trapdoor and defeat the purpose of the vault being secret. On the other hand, if it were too short, it would not reach the trapdoor. I finally decided I should do the digging first. I spent the rest of the morning digging and throwing the dirt out the opening that represented the door of Fort Stix. I figured I could move the dirt afterwards or spread it around outside. It's surprising how much dirt seems to expand when removed from a hole. I noticed this when I heard a voice from outside but could not see out through the door. "How come you went and blocked the door?" Mark asked, staring blindly from the very bright outside into the cavernous darkness within. I looked up to see him lying on top of the dirt piled at the door. At the time, I was busy shoring up the wall to prevent yet another cave-in. It seems as though the sandy soil of northern Indiana is not conducive to caves. I'm making a secret vault, and the dirt is part of my new security measures, I explained. Cool, he said, and wormed his way in through the opening to fall some 6 feet to the bottom at my feet. How do we get back out? He asked, looking at the hole above us. Since I hadn't known the sand was going to be so loose and prone to cave in, my plan to carve steps was met with failure as the bank caved in continuously. We're going to have to climb out, I said. Okay, he seemed unsure. Mom said to tell you lunch was ready. I tried to climb out, but only succeeded in sliding all the way back down as the loose sand fell away under my feet. I sat for a few minutes contemplating what to do. I was hungry, and if I didn't get out of there soon, my lunch would be cold. Then I remembered what I read about ancient Egyptians when they built the pyramids and got an idea. Digging away at the opening, I made a ramp from the bottom all the way out. After this, it was easy to just walk up the ramp and out into the sunlight where I found I could not see anything in the brightness. We need to build the ladder after lunch before we finish digging the vault, I said with confidence, and led the way to the house where lunch awaited. I kept my mind busy while I ate, designing the floor system which was to cover the vault and the ladder. Mark was still eating when I finished, so I went ahead to start making the ladder without him. Not much different than starting the digging without him. I knew where there was a pile of shortboards in the back of the garage, and it just so happened that my dad had a couple of 2x4s left over from when he built the bathroom. I laid them down and put the shortboards across to make rungs. I was about to start nailing it all together when I could not decide how far the rings should be spaced. I contemplated this for a few moments and came up with a plan. I put one close to the bottom and then took a step beside the ladder. Where my foot landed marked the distance between the rungs. Ingenious. I repeated this until the length of the 2x4s was equally spaced with rungs. Driving the last nail, I had to admit my ladder looked pretty good. I leaned it up on the side of the garage for a test climb and stepped on the first rung. That is when I noticed a problem. I had to raise my knee almost to my chin to be able to step onto the next rung. Too far apart. Instead of taking it apart and starting over, I nailed another rung in between the first ones to halve the distance. This time when I stood it up and tried, it was much easier to climb. Triumphant, I took it to Fort Stix and shoved it in the doorway. I had just gotten back inside to finish shoring up and digging when Mark arrived. He was not much interested in digging, but did not seem to mind handing me boards while I shored up the walls. When we were finally confident the walls would stop falling, I began to dig a little deeper. Sometime during the afternoon, my brother wandered off from the excavation, leaving the foreman to become the crew once again, as he went to find something fun to do that didn't involve my saying, "Dig faster." I continued to dig, as I was going to make my plan a reality. "What's a privy?" my little brother asked from the top of the dirt pile. He had come back after a while when I was once again digging and shoring up the hole. "Grandpa said you should dig the hole first and then move the privy over it." I chased him off, growling I would show him what a privy was, face first. He returned in time for the planking of the floor, carrying a bird's nest with several blue robin eggs. One was cracked, but I figured they would all hatch fine if left in the vault, because I noticed earlier that day how hot it was in there. They were now safe in the vault, along with the flattened toad we had so meticulously peeled off the road, the chicken foot I got from Gracie, and of course our prize, the unopened can of Falstaff beer we had found lying in the swamp when the hot summer sun had all but dried it up. Climbing the ladder that evening out of the vault, I closed the trapdoor, feeling confident that our valuables were now safe. I had moved the dirt out from the doorway to form a berm around the entrance, much like a machine gun pit in a movie. Stepping outside, I closed and secured the door. Yep, everything was secure in the vault at Fort Stix. I fell asleep before my head even hit the pillow after dinner. I had grabbed a magazine to read, and the last thing I remembered was opening it up to see a flock of ducks landing among decoys in a pond. When I woke in the morning, the light was off, and my magazine was lying on the overstuffed chair. After finishing my breakfast and chores, I set off to look for snakes, since I hadn't played with any for a few days. Snakes are fascinating creatures, and as a boy, it was not uncommon for me to have several garter snakes or blue racers on my person. Only one time did I ever forget to take all my snakes out of my pockets before giving my mother my breeches for washing, and that time, I think the willow tree cried harder than I did when she snatched the switch from it. Snakes were not only wonderful, but abundant on the old farm, for scattered in the field around my hideout, Fort Stix, were many discarded rusty car parts. Car parts, it turns out, are the favorite hiding place of snakes. I spent many an hour flipping over car parts to expose a sleeping snake so I could catch him, play with them a bit, and then release them back in the wild. Some, which were especially docile, got to hang out with me longer, as they would sit in a pocket peering out as I continued my adventures. I caught and released the same snakes so many times that soon they didn't even bother to try to get away. They would just relax and wait for me to pick them up. Sitting in Fort Stix after a particularly successful morning of snake wrangling, my brother and I attempted to count how many snakes I had caught as they reeled around on the floor around us. During one attempted count, I noticed a tail sticking up in the air, and looking closer, saw that one of the smaller snakes was wriggling between the floorboards that covered the vault below. It gave me an idea. Why not put all the snakes I caught down there to protect our treasure? I could feed them bugs, and I was sure the occasional mouse would venture in for the larger ones. I told my brother about this idea, and he seemed to think it was smart. We opened the vault hatch in the corner next to the door and started putting the snakes in. Some of them, seeing where their brothers and sisters were going, volunteered to go in on their own, which just made the job easier. Before long, they were all secure in the vault, and we set off to find them a bunch of bugs to eat. At first, we could not decide what type of bugs the snakes would like best, so we settled on capturing every bug we saw that would not sting us or bite us. This way, the snakes would be able to choose what they wanted. About the time my brother and I finished dropping the last handful of crickets into the vault to feed the snakes, a truck pulled up the dusty driveway, and a big fella got out to talk to my dad by the garage where he fixed cars. When I noticed they had opened cans of beer, I knew they would be here a while, so I approached the truck where a red-headed boy about my age was sitting, watching them talk. "Hey there," I said, walking up. "I'm Kevin. Want to come check out my fort?" "Hi, I'm Red," he said, looking me up and down. "I don't know. My dad said he was only going to be a minute talking to your dad about fixing his big truck." I cast a glance over at my dad. He finished his beer and had already pulled 2 more out of the cooler. "It looks like we'll be a while," I said, knowing how these things go. My dad was incapable of having a quick conversation. "They're already on their second beer." "Yeah, I guess," Red said half-heartedly, and opened the door of the truck. He climbed from the truck cautiously, as if the ground might fall out from under him, and slowly looked around. After a studious glance around the farm, he joined us in the walk. I noticed he kept looking around nervously and wondered what he knew that I did not. "Why are you looking around like that?" I asked. "I'm looking for dogs," he said quietly. "I don't like to get snuck up on by dogs." "Oh," I replied, looking around. It occurred to me to tell him that we didn't have no dogs, but I kept lookout too, 'cause it seemed like something we should be concerned with. It was a long, perilous journey from the driveway, past the chicken coop and outhouse, winding our way through the maze of car parts until finally we arrived at Fort Stix. I'm happy to report that we didn't encounter any dogs on our trek, but there was a close call with a flapping white feathery beast that tried to eat our new friend's fingers when he poked them into the chicken coop. I stood back to let my new friend check out my fort and saw that he was suitably impressed as he studied the construction. nodding and saying yeah to himself. I was starting to think maybe he was all right and might make a great new member, until he revealed he was not too bright. "Where's the door?" he asked. I low-crawled over the dirt berm and rolled down into the door, followed by Mark, and finally Red. "Wow, you guys sure got a secure fort," Red said as he walked in and took a seat near the door. He was looking at the way we built the fort and reached up to touch the joint where the roof met the walls. I was waiting for him to ask another question when in the distance I heard his dad holler for him, and he said he had to go. Man, I did not want him to leave yet. I wanted to talk about the fort some more and show him the vault and our neat security system. "Hold on a second," I said, getting up from my bucket and reaching for the vault hatch. "Check this out." I was grinning ear to ear as his eyes got big and he exclaimed, "Wow, you got a hidden area." He leaned forward to look into the vault, and I was beginning to wonder if maybe he was memorizing our treasures, because he squinted his eyes and was looking real close and hard at something. Then all of a sudden, he shrieked, started backpedaling to get out the door, and scrambled over the berm before I even realized what was happening. I could hear him yelling all the way back to his dad's truck, where he jumped in and rolled the window up. Standing there in the fading sunlight, Mark climbed over the berm to stand next to me as I watched them leave. Red had his face pressed against the glass and was looking at us kind of crazy. Then Mark asked me, "Why do you suppose he was hollering there was snakes in the vault?" I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.